Kristina, over to you and to your panel. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention today. As Kimberly said, I am the U.S. Vice Chair for Raise Up, which is an AI-driven career development platform with the mission to increase women and the global majority within the travel industry through D&I efforts. I am joined by a powerful and dynamic team of experts who have insights on how we can actually implement real steps into moving forward. I'm joined by Susann Almasi from McKinsey, Stephanie Jones from Culture Heritage Economic Alliance, and also Susie Vowinkel from Google. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me. Let's just jump straight into it. What are the challenges we are facing right now in the industry, particularly since the pandemic? I know, Susan, you have stats, and Stephanie can add in some more information about that.
Yeah, thanks, Kristina. First and foremost, I want to emphasize COVID-19, remains a humanitarian crisis, and I think it's had such a devastating impact, more so than any of us potentially imagined in 2020, and affected, most of us personally. And that crisis isn't over, right? Specifically in the travel industry in Q2, I think many of us saw some glimmering hope, but the recent emergence of the Delta variant is just a reminder that this crisis is far from over, and we're likely going to see ebbs and flows. When it comes to the travel industry, there's two things that come to mind, and specifically when it comes to diverse representation, the travel industry was behind even prior to the pandemic. McKinsey runs an annual survey called the Women in the Workplace Survey. And in 2019, we interviewed over 300 organizations representing 12 million employees. And in those results, we saw that the representation of women and people in color in the travel and logistics sector notably underperformed, particularly in the managerial and senior roles. That survey also then looked at what's been happening in 2020 and COVID, and across all industries, we saw that particularly women and women of color were really taking the brunt of this double duty effect with additional obligations of being at home. And so, one thing to bring that to light, there's a staggering statistic that nearly 1 in 4 women considered leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers in 2020. So as COVID continues to ebb and flow, this is going to be a massive challenge for the industry to overcome.
Stephanie, do you have any additional thoughts? Stephanie, you're muted. The most repeated phrase.
Okay. So sorry. Thank you for having your numerous conversations to numerous DEI 17 months. His challenges that from media.
You know what, Stephanie, I think you're having a little bit trouble with audio, so we're going to try to
can't hear me
in the background a little bit. But
Kristina, I'm happy to jump in while we get that fixed off. Yeah, one thing that I thought about as you think about what's facing this industry, even prior to COVID, but even more so now, is safety in travel, and particularly as we think about women and different diverse groups and how they feel about traveling for not only work but personally, and companies have had to face that. I sat on a very interesting panel about 2 years ago just talking about how many women were challenged to travel internationally for business and some things that you could do to help protect them. And it's become even more, as we think about COVID, safety in travel has become even more prevalent as people think about the pandemic and how to travel safely. So travel companies are challenged even more so now to think about not only how do we make it safe for everyone to feel comfortable traveling, but including thinking about the health safety of it.
Definitely. And so, as we're thinking about what do we do now in terms of keeping a D&I effort, what are the kind of things that we can do? What are the first steps any company of any size can do at this point to begin their D&I effort? Stephanie, do you want to try again?
Do you hear me?
Hey, Stephanie, would you mind exiting out and then joining again? We'll see if that'll fix the issue.
All right, thank you.
So, essentially the question really is, for a company of any size, for instance, I am a startup founder, and I really want to make sure that I am taking active steps to actually have a D&I effort. So one of the things that we've actually done internally at my startup is looking at our leadership from top to bottom, making sure that not only are we reaching out to individuals for potential positions across the world, because now essentially being at home has opened up the entire world as a workforce, but also making sure that those companies that we're also working with are from diverse backgrounds. And so, what other kind of things can we do at this point, and other ideas that we can provide to our listeners today about what they can do from a overall standpoint? Stephanie, do you want to try one more time?
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. I just removed my ear pods. Well, certainly. Well, one of the first steps is to engage in a DEI effort is for executive leadership to really become intentional about making change within their organizations and for those that they serve and represent. So it must start at the top. The second step, I would say, is to identify someone within the organization or hire someone with a skill set to manage the effort. And thirdly, I would say be prepared to include DEI as a line item in your budget, because that's the only way your efforts are going to be sustainable. You cannot approach DEI as a one-time, short-term thing that you do just to check off the box.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if anyone's saying, well, let's say I don't have a budget, I don't really have the resources to put to this, but I want to do something, what are the kind of things that you can do other than just saying to somebody, here's your job, you go do it?
Well, what I would say again, start within your organization, by forming, and I've heard many folks in the industry have created DEI committees, advisory groups within their own organizations. Some have even tapped people outside of the organization so that they have more diverse and inclusive voices. And so that's a good place to start. Leverage your local resources and groups that already exist that address diversity, equity, and inclusion within your community. And this is a great opportunity to collaborate and partner, to bring additional resources within the organization to address DEI.
Yeah, Kristina, one thing I would add to that is absolutely for small companies, focusing internally and doing what you can, knowing that resources might not be in abundance to dedicate to this, but focusing internally is great. I also think it's really important to think about the message that you put out externally for your company and the brand that you're creating. So as you think about marketing messages, are you creating messages that are inclusive and reach out to a diverse audience? I know at Google, we've thought a lot about this, and we're helping people think about their creative strategy as they think about marketing. There's a toolkit that everyone can access at google.com/all-in. That is an inclusive marketing toolkit. So for a small company that may be doing things, all on their own and not have an abundance of resources, I think things like that are great to think about, and also to make sure that you're telling your company to really think about, are we putting a diverse message out to those that see our brand out in the public?
Yeah, and just to chime on to that, right? Each organizations, they set their aspiration. It does have to be rooted into what's achievable. And as you all just mentioned, right, some of that can be internal and setting new milestones for the organization, or external, right? You already spoke, Stephanie, about the supplier diversity, and Susie, you mentioned how do you incorporate that in your day-to-day strategy of business. And then Blair also mentioned it, right? How do you get associated with underrepresented markets that might be part of your community? And so there's certainly ample opportunities to make it part, whether it's internal or external.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of brings a really interesting point. Definitely the first step is to look about who do you have around you, whether that be internally or externally. But I think sometimes, unfortunately, as we are looking internally, the idea of bias, I think, ultimately does start to play in about how we look at the world, unintentional bias. And so how are some ways that we can combat this in terms of how we're doing our business from day to day?
I will jump in. Well, one of the things I think we can do is, as individuals, think before we speak. Because sometimes, depending on the role that you serve within an organization, we have the tendency to feel like we can say what we want to say. And even when we're in meetings with other coworkers, sometimes we're not really being thoughtful about our words and how those words might impact someone that's sitting around the table. The other thing we have to do is, as individuals working with other people, don't be afraid to ask your coworker how your words or your actions made them feel. Because oftentimes when you're working in a setting within a company, and there may be a person of color that feels some type of way because of an action that was taken by a coworker or something that was said, but they won't say anything, so just be mindful that your words and your actions, they do matter, and that they can impact others that you work with and impact relationships, but not only within the organization, but outside of the organization as well.
Yeah, Kristina, one thing I would add to that, again, is thinking about your processes and having checks and balances in place that look for bias. So when you think about your hiring process, or you think about your performance review process, do you have a set of checks and balances in place to say, am I, making sure that I'm hiring this person and thinking about all these different things about that hire that might look for bias? Again, as you look at someone's performance review, are there bias in place? And you have a set of questions that you've established that you ask yourself before you go into that process. So I would really encourage, as you think about the different processes in your organization, to set those kind of checks and balances.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's very clear that we all have biases, regardless of whatever gender, race, whatever that you are, wherever you're placed into the world, you do have a bias, and be able to question that or even to confront it isn't a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing, especially when you're trying to retain a diverse team. So let's say, for instance, you've been able to create a really great dynamic group of people from all different backgrounds. What does that retention look like? What are some general steps that you can do to maintain that momentum of keeping them there? Susan, do you have any stats for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So just one thing to bear in mind, right, as we think about retention, it's not just folks in their individual role, but then also what is the potential to help them grow through the organizational pipeline, if you will. So a couple things to bear in mind. First, mentorship programs, right? That's certainly something that we've seen a lot of organizations starting to build up. The thought process there is, how do you make sure that the folks who are the mentors aren't those select few senior DEI individuals that you may already have, right? How do you balance that workload and make it an all, everyone's responsibility and part of the organizational fabric? But even more so than mentorship, sponsorship, right? We're seeing more so that creating opportunities for folks to step up and try new things and do it so in a safe environment by taking risks. That sponsorship's generally going to be done by male leaders. Again, some statistics. 1 in 4 women were concerned negatively that during COVID they would be judged for caretaker responsibilities. That number compared to just 1 in 11 for men. Right. So as we think of particularly during the time of COVID, how can you offer flexibility? And I know that's something Simon spoke about. Offer flexibility and enable women particularly to set boundaries. And then not only create those programs, but then also how do you strengthen employee communication so that people are aware of those programs and really feel empowered that they can take advantage of those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that also leads to the question of, the word or the phrase culture building is one that kind of gets thrown around. But what does that actually mean? What does that look like in a post-COVID world?
Oh, okay, I'll jump in right there. Well, for me, culture building means really embracing and strengthening your organization's culture by really being inclusive, and including the voices, ideas, and thoughts of people that work in the mailroom all the way up to the C-suite. Organizations can really build more culture through team building. But I think this is a tremendous opportunity for HR representatives to leverage the diverse culture that exists within their companies or organizations to educate all of the employees about the various types of cultures that exist. Because oftentimes, if you're not asking people, there's a lot of assumptions made about your background or who you are and what you do. So I think that this is a really great opportunity for HR representatives to create those opportunities for broader conversations and communication to happen within the organization with diverse groups of folks. Plus, diversity, it increases creativity. So when you're able to invite different people from different cultures to be part of brainstorming sessions, to work on projects together, the outcome is just going to be stronger. And people will feel like they're included, in the process and a part of the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think culture competency is a huge thing that HR managers can definitely begin to operate as part of an annual training that they do. Mm-hmm. Raise Up definitely has been working on modules for that. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add a couple of things on I think culture is very important, especially in the environment we're working in. A lot of us are still working from home, and it's hard to have culture when everyone's in a remote environment. But there's a couple of things I think about with culture specifically, and this is something very important to me as I do site leadership over our Washington sites, and it's huge that we think about the culture that we maintain for those sites. A lot of times throughout my career, I've heard people talk about hiring for culture fit. And I think what we've thought about a lot recently is it's not culture fit. We're not just trying to have everyone fit into a specific culture that we've defined, but are we hiring for culture add? Is it someone that's going to bring something more to the culture? And, the other thing I think is you can't, build a good culture without addressing toxic culture. So if there are things that exist within your culture that are not productive or are detracting from a positive culture, addressing that and being really aware of what is going on. I think one of the best ways that I have experienced learning more about the culture and what that culture add is many companies have ERG groups that, are built up of so many different profiles within your organization. And so I've made a priority to spend time with each of these groups so I can really learn what's important to them. How do they experience Google? How do they experience, the site that they sit at Google? And just really understanding what each of those groups, whether it be, our Women at group, our Black Googlers, whatever the group is, understanding more about how they're experiencing the culture so that you can bring it all together for a cohesive one.
That was great. That was awesome. So overall, I know as listeners are listening to this fantastic panel, they're asking, well, what are some practical tools I can start with for individuals and companies who are, again, starting out? I know we said internally, but literally, what is the first thing I'm supposed to do? Susan or Stephanie?
Yeah, happy to kick this one off. So look, I think there's a couple things. We know that inclusion is key to attracting and retaining talent. And we know that inclusion is strongly linked to employee engagement and individual career choices. Just one more statistic for you here. Across multiple studies in both North America and Europe, 40% of employees either turned down a job or didn't pursue a job because they didn't believe that the organization was going to be an inclusive place to work. Right. And that's an astounding statistic. And it goes even further when you say that the state of inclusion shows that organizations still struggle. And a separate survey showed that 50% of employees didn't feel included at work. And that's ultimately an issue of trust, and that's going to dampen performance. And I think building just off of what Susie said, so much of that comes to culture. And I think there's a couple different ways you can look at it. The first is, right, look at your leadership. Is it a diverse and inclusive group? If not, how do you at least talk about it and start building and sharing that communication that is an aspiration? The second, meritocracy and initiatives to increase fairness. This is one, as we just spoke about, whether it's in training or in your performance reviews, how do you communicate that you're actively doing things to improve that? And then the last two, which we spoke of earlier, sponsorship, right? Making sure people feel they can have opportunities to step up. And even if those programs aren't set into place yet, how do you just have access to senior leaders? How do you make yourself available so that you can start having these conversations and that people start feeling more empowered and build that trust up?
Well, after numerous meetings with industry stakeholders over the past 17 months about how to address DEI, BTT, we wanted to make a point that DEI must begin as a personal journey. Every employee is not going to feel the same way about diversity and inclusion. They're just not. And it's important to provide each employee an opportunity to understand first what DEI is, because everybody is not starting on the same page. And in how their actions and their attitudes about diversity and inclusion impacts others within and outside of the organization. So to assist the industry in taking a first step towards DEI, BTT, we created a DEI deep dive masterclass that we launched last October. And it gives organizations a non-judgmental tool to provide each of their staff members time to really self-reflect about DEI, as well as to gain personal insights about, how do they address unintentional bias, and how do they interact with their employees. So this tool, again, just allows individuals to take a personal journey through DEI, because it's important for organizations to recognize that everyone is not starting on the same page with how they feel and think about diversity and inclusion within their organization, but also within their own personal lives.
Absolutely. And I think, audit, it's an interesting word to use, but essentially that's what you're doing. You're doing an audit of yourself. You're checking yourself, and you're also checking your organization about what are your gaps. And I think judgment, I think Stephanie, I think you hit it really on the nail. It really is about, it's not a judgment that you're doing on yourself. You're actually trying to better yourself. So
Exactly.
if an assessment and an audit is a judgment, let's just take that out of our lexicon and just say we're bettering ourselves. I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions, but I think my last question is, what does an ideal future look like in the travel sector? Being more inclusive and more diverse. What does it look like once the sun parts and the clouds are cleared away? What does it look like for us?
Well, I'll start. For me, it looks more equitable. Okay. Diversity and inclusion, it cannot be the final outcome for our industry efforts or any organizational efforts. Equitable opportunities that translate into more people of color in C-suite positions, more diversity contracting, more diverse speakers. Those types of things should be the outcomes of any DEI effort. So if equitable opportunities are not part of that, then I think we're not traveling down the right path.
I agree with Stephanie, and would add that I think we all are bullish on the future of the travel industry and hoping that it comes back strong. But by focusing on this, that is going to help to making all travelers feel included. We know there's pent-up demand. We see it in what people are searching for. They're saying, can I travel? International travel. People are eager to get back into it. But they have to feel comfortable doing so. They have to be included. And we have to think about the messaging that we're delivering out there to bring travelers back and to bring all travelers back.
That is, I think, an amazing segment into what we have for questions. I know Jill and Kimberly have had some questions from the group that I think we should probably just jump in on. If you guys are available to start, we can definitely start that through. Jill, you're on mute.
Okay, there we go. Got it. Yeah, so thanks everyone. We've got time for a couple questions here. One, can you maybe talk about what organizations, how they are aligning with, other organizations or with their own supply chains to further amplify their impact?
Well, I can give some examples because the National Blacks in Travel and Tourism Collaborative, we've been really successful in um, aligning ourselves with industry allies who want to partner with us because our mission is to advance Blacks in travel and tourism. So many of our industry allies, they partner with us to leverage our network of Black talent and professionals, content creators, but also because of what we represent and what we're really striving toward to make the industry become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so by aligning their missions with the work that we're doing, instead of them having to reinvent the wheel or come up with some initiative, it just makes sense for them to leverage their resources by partnering with us to be able to, again, tap into our network. For example, today I received a few emails about press trip opportunities that they're looking to fill. So we're able to leverage our network of Black content creators to share that opportunity. I received an email. We have our Black Tourism Talent Directory where we match Black talent with industry opportunities. And so we've had several industry organizations, including North Star Travel Group, that is one of our industry partners, and they're able to tap into Black talent that's part of that platform. So there have been many industry allies that we have found, see the value in aligning themselves with an organization such as BTT and others, the Black Travel Alliance, because they want to become intentional about being able to diversify, whether it's a speaker lineup, whether it's their employee pool, whether it's in contracting. So these types of relationships are a win-win for all.
I would also add as well too, when you're looking at your own outside contractors as well too. There are many individuals who have great alignments with the travel industry that are available to you that are from very diverse backgrounds. So outside of hiring, definitely look to your contractors as well too, to see what kind of pool that you have available. Raise Up is one of those organizations, startup organizations that are really key in on making sure you have those connections. So there are many startups right now who are seeing the need for these particular answers, or for this piece of questions, I should really say.
Right. Absolutely. All right. We're almost out of time, but I kind of want to go back to our first session where we talked about hope with Blair. Maybe we could all just go around real quickly and say, are you hopeful for the future? And in just a couple words, why?
I'll start. So one thing I'm particularly hopeful about is just the innovation of it. I think we've become so innovative and we're talking. And I think that has been the biggest thing. We haven't been talking to each other. And the fact that we're having this conversation has spoken, how many inroads we've done, definitely in the last 18 months or so. And so I am happy and joyful that we're having these conversations. And I definitely want to thank Phocuswright for the opportunity as well too.
Yeah, just to chime in, right? I think we're talking about it so much more, and we're noticing it in different ways. A few months ago, I was at a large travel organization in a room with some senior folks, mostly gentlemen, right? 7 to 8 gentlemen and myself. And the CHRO happened to be walking by and saw me in the room and poked their head in and said, "It's so nice to see a female in this room," right? So whether it's female, different types of diversity, people are not only talking about it in conversations like this, but we're starting to notice it. And now it really comes to just following through on that action. So I'm excited for what's ahead.
Susie,
I am very, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm absolutely hopeful, and I know we are not there yet. But what gives me a lot of hope is it comes up in conversations I have with partners often. So in the past, when we're maybe just talking about our partnership initiatives, you have an executive at a company say, what does your company do from a diversity perspective? Or how are you thinking about your women leaders? And asking those questions that didn't exist, in years past. So very hopeful about that. And the fact that we have set goals around this, the fact that we're here having this conversation today. I know that it's been made a priority, and there's probably some areas where it still needs to be stronger, But the fact that we have written and communicated goals around this within my organization, I feel very confident that it is a priority and that we'll continue to make progress.
I am very hopeful as well. One, that we're continuing to have this conversation on DEI, because as the industry continues to rebound and we all get back to our busyness, I know that DEI is not going to continue to be a priority, but it's important that we continue to ensure that it is a priority. And as I just heard some of my colleagues mention, that it becomes interwoven into organizations' missions, and that, it's something that they are embracing through their decision making, with hiring practices, with contracting, with speaker lineups. So DEI is just not a reactive, momentary thing that we responded to with the Black Lives Matter movement, but it is indeed a need for change in our industry, as we're working to build back better, to make certain that we're building back better as a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive industry for everyone that wants to participate in it.
Perfect. Great. All right. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your insights. We very much appreciate it. Of course, we always, run out of time when we're in the middle of deep, good conversations. But thank you, Kristina, and thank you to all of our panelists. And I'm going to hand it back over to Kimberly.